Have you ever noticed how the people you want most are often the ones who seem least interested in you? It's not a coincidence. Throughout history, the most influential figures weren't those desperately seeking approval. They were the ones who mastered strategic indifference. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. When you chase validation, you hand over your power. But when you become selectively disinterested, others begin chasing you. Think about it. The friend who's always available gets taken for granted. The employee who's constantly seeking praise rarely receives it. The lover who shows too much interest often watches their partner's desire fade. But flip the script, become the one whose approval others seek, and suddenly the dynamic shifts in your favor. This isn't about being cruel or manipulative. It's about understanding a fundamental truth of human psychology. We value what we must work for. We pursue what seems just beyond our reach. And we respect those who don't need our validation to feel complete. In the next few minutes, I'll reveal how strategic indifference can transform your relationships, career, and self-worth. You'll learn why constantly seeking approval keeps you trapped, and how breaking free from this cycle places you in a position of genuine strength. The principles I'm about to share have helped kings control kingdoms, leaders command respect, and ordinary people gain extraordinary influence. If you've ever felt powerless in your interactions or found yourself working too hard for someone's attention, what follows might be the most important lesson you'll ever learn about human dynamics. Number 1. The abundance paradox. Have you ever met someone who seemed completely at ease while everyone around them competed for their attention? There's something magnetic about a person who remains calm in a world of chaos, who stays selective when everyone else is scrambled to please. These people understand something fundamental about human nature, something most of us get backwards. Think about your own experiences for a moment. When you really want someone to like you, what's your natural response? Most people try harder. They show more interest. They become more available. They shower the other person with attention, hoping to receive the same in return. But here's the surprising truth. This approach almost always backfires. Why? Because showing too much interest signals scarcity. It telegraphs that you don't have many options or that you're desperate for this particular person's approval. And humans, whether we like to admit it or not, are wired to value what's scarce and take for granted what's abundant. This brings us to our first principle of strategic indifference, the abundance paradox. Most people try to win others over by showing intense interest, but this reveals scarcity thinking. Instead, what if you flipped this equation entirely? What if you created a psychological environment where your time and attention are valuable resources that exist in limited supply? This isn't about playing games or being dishonest. It's about recognizing your own worth and operating from a genuine place of personal abundance while projecting selective scarcity. When you do this, people instinctively begin competing for your validation rather than you competing for theirs. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Instead of texting someone 5 times hoping for a response, you send one thoughtful message and then continue with your day, completely at peace with whether they respond or not. Instead of clearing your schedule whenever a certain person is free, you maintain your own priorities and fit them in when it genuinely works for you. The abundance paradox works because it creates a subtle shift in perception. When you're selective with your attention, people assume it's because your attention is valuable. And what do humans do with valuable things? We work for them. We appreciate them. We don't take them for granted. I saw this principle work dramatically in my own life when I stopped chasing clients and started treating my time as the precious resource it actually is. Suddenly, the same people who were slow to respond became eager to secure spots in my calendar. The same companies that were hesitant to commit now worried about losing the opportunity to work with me. Remember, abundant things don't require pursuit. By creating an environment where your validation is meaningful, precisely because it's not freely given to everyone, you tap into a fundamental psychological trigger. People begin seeing you as the prize rather than the pursuer. The abundance paradox isn't about becoming cold or unavailable, it's about being selective, which paradoxically makes people value your attention more. When you master this first principle, you'll notice a complete shift in your interactions. Others will begin pursuing your approval rather than you chasing theirs. Number 2. The validation inversion technique. Think back to your last important conversation. Did you find yourself asking, "What do you think?" or "Is this okay with you?" We've been trained to seek confirmation for our thoughts, decisions, and even our existence. It's almost automatic, this constant checking to see if we're measuring up to some external standard. But what if I told you this habit is quietly sabotaging your influence? Every time you seek validation, you're sending a powerful message that your thoughts, opinions, and decisions need external approval to be legitimate. You're positioning yourself at the bottom of an invisible hierarchy and elevating the other person to the position of judge. And once you establish this dynamic, it's incredibly difficult to change. This brings us to our second principle of strategic indifference, the validation inversion technique. Instead of seeking external confirmation, what if you created a complete validation inversion in your relationships? Rather than chasing approval, what if you established yourself as the standard bearer? This isn't about becoming arrogant or dismissive. It's about fundamentally changing your mental positioning in every interaction. The technique works through subtle but powerful shifts in your language and behavior. For example, instead of asking, "Do you think this is good?" you might say, "I believe this works because." Instead of saying, "I hope that's okay," you might say, "This is what I've decided to do." When someone shares an idea with you, rather than automatically agreeing, you take a moment to genuinely consider it on its merits. You become the thoughtful evaluator rather than the eager pleaser. This transforms you from validation seeker to validation giver, completely reversing the power dynamic. I remember watching this principle in action with a colleague who always seemed to command respect in meetings. While others frantically sought agreement for their ideas, she would listen carefully and then offer her considered opinion. She never asked if others approved of her thoughts. She simply shared them with quiet confidence. Over time, people began seeking her approval rather than the other way around. This technique becomes particularly powerful when you implement it consistently across all your interactions. Start noticing how often you seek external validation. Do you apologize when no apology is needed? Do you end your statements with questions that undermine your authority? Do you change your opinion when met with the slightest resistance? The validation inversion technique isn't about never considering others' opinions. Quite the opposite. It's about approaching interactions from a place of secure self-knowledge rather than insecure seeking. You listen to others because you're genuinely interested, not because you need their approval to feel whole. The most profound shift happens internally. When you stop outsourcing your validation, you begin to develop an unshakable sense of self-worth. You become the one whose opinion matters most to you. And ironically, when you reach this state, others begin to value your opinion more as well. By implementing this second principle of strategic indifference, you'll transform from validation seeker to validation giver. And in doing so, you'll completely change how others perceive and respond to you in every interaction. Number 3. Strategic accessibility. Windows. Have you ever noticed that the people who command the most respect are rarely the most available? Think about it. The CEO who's impossible to get on the calendar, the professor with limited office hours, the friend who's selective about their time. These people often receive more appreciation when they do show up. Meanwhile, those who are perpetually available often find their presence taken for granted, their input valued less. There's a fascinating psychological principle at work here that most people completely misunderstand. We assume that constant availability demonstrates commitment and builds relationships, but in reality, it often achieves the opposite effect. When something, or someone, is always accessible, they become background noise rather than a signal worth paying attention to. This brings us to our third principle of strategic indifference: strategic accessibility windows. Highly sought-after people understand something most don't. They aren't always available. Instead, they implement what I call strategic accessibility windows, designated periods when they're fully engaged and present, followed by deliberate unavailability. This creates a rhythm of connection and space that builds anticipation and appreciation for their presence. Now, I want to be clear. This isn't about playing childish games or playing hard to get in the traditional sense. Those approaches are manipulative and transparent. Strategic accessibility windows are different because they're honest. You're genuinely focusing your energy where it matters most instead of being perpetually accessible for everything and everyone. Let me show you how this works in practice. Instead of responding to every message immediately, you might designate specific times of day for communication. Instead of always being the one to initiate plans, you allow space for others to pursue connection with you. Instead of dropping everything when someone wants your attention, you maintain healthy boundaries around your time and energy. I witnessed the power of this principle when I began implementing it in my own professional life. Previously, I prided myself on immediate responses and constant availability, but I noticed something troubling. My clients seemed to value my input less over time. My always-on approach was actually diminishing my perceived value. When I shifted to strategic accessibility windows, being fully present during designated times but unavailable during others, something remarkable happened. The same people who took my immediate responses for granted now anticipated our scheduled interactions. They came more prepared, they valued my input more highly, and most surprisingly, they began respecting my boundaries without question. The psychology behind this principle is simple but profound. Humans value what isn't always available. When your presence becomes a limited resource rather than a constant, people naturally begin to prize it more highly. This doesn't mean becoming distant or unresponsive. It means being intentional about when and how you're available. It means bringing your full presence during your accessibility windows, and then honoring your own need for space and focused work during other times. Strategic accessibility windows create a healthy rhythm in your relationships, a balance of connection and space that allows both parties to appreciate each other more fully. When you implement this third principle of strategic indifference, you'll find that people don't just accept your boundaries. They actually respect you more for having them. Number 4, the mirror principle. Have you ever noticed how quickly most people jump to provide validation when asked for it? Someone shares an idea and asks, "What do you think?" And instantly we're offering our approval or suggestions. We've been socially conditioned to respond immediately to these requests for validation. But what if this automatic response is actually robbing us of influence? Consider what happens in this common exchange. When someone seeks your approval and you quickly provide it, you've accepted an invisible role. You've become the validator, but you've also tacitly agreed that your own worth isn't being evaluated. You've stepped into the role they've assigned you without questioning the dynamic itself. This brings us to our fourth principle of strategic indifference, the mirror principle. When others seek your approval, resist the urge to immediately grant it. Instead, employ what I call the mirror principle. Reflect their seeking behavior back by asking thoughtful questions about their motivations. This accomplishes two remarkable things at once. It positions you as the evaluator rather than the evaluated, and it creates genuine connection through curiosity rather than validation trading. Here's what this looks like in practice. When someone asks, "Do you like my idea?" instead of saying, "Yes, it's great," or offering suggestions for improvement, you might ask, "What aspects of it are you most confident about?" Or, "What made you approach the problem this way?" When someone seeks your endorsement on a decision, you might ask, "How did you arrive at this conclusion?" The mirror principle works because it gently shifts the dynamic of the interaction without being confrontational. You're not refusing to engage, you're actually engaging more deeply, but on different terms. You're moving from passive validator to active explorer of their thinking. I saw this principle transform a colleague's leadership approach. Previously, her team constantly sought her approval for decisions, creating a bottleneck and reinforcing their dependence on her validation. When she began employing the mirror principle, responding to validation seeking with thoughtful questions, something remarkable happened. Her team members began thinking more independently. They started coming to her not for approval, but for genuine collaboration. And most importantly, they began to see themselves as capable decision-makers rather than approval seekers. This approach creates a virtuous cycle. As you reflect questions back, people begin examining their own thinking more deeply. They develop stronger reasoning skills. They become less dependent on external validation. And ironically, they often end up valuing your perspective more because you're not freely giving approval. You're offering something much more valuable, the opportunity for them to strengthen their own thinking. The mirror principle isn't about being difficult or withholding. It's about creating space for deeper connection and growth. When someone seeks your approval, they're often looking for something more fundamental: confidence, clarity, or confirmation of their own worth. By reflecting their question back, you help them find these things within themselves rather than remaining dependent on external sources. By implementing this fourth principle of strategic indifference, you'll not only position yourself as the evaluator rather than the evaluated, you'll also help others develop greater self-reliance and clearer thinking. And in doing so, you'll build relationships based on genuine exchange rather than validation seeking. Number 5. The independence core. Have you ever met someone who seemed completely unfazed by criticism? Someone who could hear opposing viewpoints without becoming defensive? Someone who seemed to possess an inner calm that no external storm could disturb? These rare individuals have mastered something that most people spend their entire lives struggling with. They've developed what I call an independence core. Most of us live in constant reaction to the world around us. We're elated when praised, devastated when criticized. We pursue actions that will earn approval and avoid those that might invite judgment. We constantly adjust our behavior based on the reactions we receive or anticipate from others. It's exhausting, and it places the control of our emotional state entirely in external hands. This brings us to our fifth and perhaps most powerful principle of strategic indifference: the independence core. Develop what Machiavelli understood as your independence core, an unshakable internal center that remains unmoved by others' opinions. This isn't about becoming cold or distant, but about building such strong self-validation that external approval becomes a pleasant bonus rather than a desperate need. The concept is simple but profound. You become the primary evaluator of your own worth and decisions. You develop criteria for what constitutes success that don't depend on others' reactions. You learn to trust your own judgment even when it contradicts popular opinion. I witnessed the power of this principle through a mentor who never seemed rattled by criticism or inflated by praise. During a particularly difficult project, our team received harsh feedback from a client. While most of us were dejected, my mentor simply evaluated the feedback on its merits, incorporated what was useful, and discarded the rest without emotional attachment. His sense of professional worth wasn't tied to this single evaluation. It came from within. This principle differs from arrogance in a crucial way. Arrogance rejects all external input. An independence core evaluates external input without being emotionally dependent on it. You can hear criticism, consider it thoughtfully, and even incorporate it when appropriate. But your fundamental sense of worth remains separate from others' assessments. Developing an independence core requires practice. Start by noticing how much your mood depends on others' reactions. Are you constantly checking social media for validation? Do you replay conversations wondering if you were perceived well? Does criticism send you into a spiral of self-doubt? Begin building your independence core by establishing internal metrics for success. Before seeking external feedback, ask yourself, am I satisfied with this work? Does it meet my standards? What have I learned through this process? Develop the habit of self-evaluation before seeking outside opinions. When you do receive feedback, positive or negative, practice receiving it with equanimity. Appreciate praise without becoming dependent on it. Consider criticism without being destroyed by it. Remember that neither defines your worth. They're simply data points to consider. The most remarkable effect of developing an independence core is how it changes your relationships. When your happiness is self-generated rather than externally dependent, others become magnetically drawn to your emotional self-sufficiency. There's something compelling about a person who appreciates connection but doesn't desperately need it for their own wholeness. By implementing this fifth principle of strategic indifference, you'll develop an unshakable internal foundation that allows you to engage with the world from a place of strength rather than need. And paradoxically, when you no longer need others' approval to feel complete, you often receive more of it than ever before. As we've explored these 5 principles of strategic indifference, the abundance paradox, the validation, inversion technique, strategic accessibility windows, the mirror principle, and the independence core, you might notice something profound. Each builds upon the others, creating a complete framework for reclaiming your power in every interaction. Remember, this isn't about manipulation or games. It's about understanding human psychology and positioning yourself in a way that commands genuine respect. When you stop chasing validation and become the validator, when you make your time and attention meaningful through strategic scarcity, when you develop an unshakable sense of self-worth, you transform how others respond to you. Machiavelli understood centuries ago what still holds true today. Those who master strategic indifference don't just survive in a world of complex human dynamics, they thrive in it. By implementing these principles consistently, you'll find yourself in a position of authentic influence, with others naturally gravitating toward your approval rather than you seeking theirs. The power of strategic indifference isn't just about changing how others see you. It's about fundamentally changing how you see yourself. The next video the algorithm chose for you isn't random. It's your next tactical upgrade. Click it now and continue your silent ascent.